So what'd you check out this month?
Well, the first thing to mention is actually something I forgot about from last month, which was a movie called Daughter of Darkness, which I probably watched because it was directed by Stuart Gordon. It turned out it was a TV movie, although the version I watched must have been some kind of director's cut or something because there was nudity in it. It was from 1990. It starred Mia Sara as a girl who goes to Romania to find her father, who turns out to be Anthony Perkins.
Oh my god, that's horrible.
Yeah. The first half of the movie was basically her having a bunch of weird visions and nothing really happening, and her just kind of trying to investigate. But then halfway through, you find out Anthony Perkins is a vampire, and there's this whole subculture of vampires. It reminded me a lot of Blade, because they have their own council, and they're kind of arguing amongst themselves, and they turn on Anthony Perkins, and basically, since she's his daughter and he's a vampire, she has vampire powers, although she doesn't realize that. But she can walk out in the sun, so the other vampires want to find out how that's possible and try and kidnap her so they can figure something out where they can do that too. So again, it reminded me of Blade. The first half was boring. The second half was way better, but still not great. The acting was not good. Most people probably know Mia Sara from Ferris Bueller. She was also in Legend and Time Cop, and I've seen her in some other movies, and she never made a strong impression. But in this movie she did, because she was really, really bad. Anthony Perkins was cool, but honestly the only things that stood out were the idea of the vampires not having fangs, but having spikes or something in their tongues that they use to stick people with and draw out their blood, which is also the case in The Strain, which I read a long time ago and I never saw the TV show, but given that it's Del Toro, I would assume he probably, and this movie probably, got it from some kind of actual vampire idea from folklore or something. The only other thing was when they tied Anthony Perkins down in a room that the sunlight was going to come into from the window and it burned half of his face and one of his arms. I thought that was cool. But there was some really bad humor. I didn't hate it, but I would not recommend it to anybody. I watched Godzilla Singular Point, the new Godzilla anime on Netflix. I guess it was better than the previous ones, but I still did not enjoy it. The plot didn't make any sense. It had a lot of frustrating, dumb characters and dumb moments that didn't make any sense. It did the thing that a lot of modern movies and TV shows do, where they try to show you how intelligent the main characters are by having them figure things out based on basically no evidence and come to conclusions that don't make any sense based on what they do know, but of course it turns out to be right. And the entire plot wasn't even really about monsters. It was supposedly about theoretical physics, but a lot of the things relating to science, they were supposed to be the kind of ideas that make you really think and wonder about the universe and stuff like that and about reality. But it was all so dumb, where one of the protagonists, her job, basically, or her area of study, is to think about what life would be like in other dimensions. But the way she talks about it doesn't make any sense. She says things like, what would it be like to be a creature that can see with 3 eyes? But there are creatures on Earth that have more than 3 eyes. And we know what it's like to see with 1 eye. You know what it's like to see with 2 eyes. 3 eyes would just be the same thing, just with, another perspective. Maybe better depth perception if, the vision is overlapping on all 3. It was dumb. I didn't like it. I watched a movie called Blood Tide, which I have seen listed as 1 word and 2 words, from 1982, which was a weird movie. It had to be really low budget. It was set on an island off the coast of Greece, I guess. I don't even know how to describe it. James Earl Jones was in it, which he's way too good for this movie. There were people finding out about this old culture that worshipped a sea monster and sacrificed women to it, and the main guy has to rescue his sister who gets possessed or something. The movie didn't make any sense, and then it was over. So, yeah, definitely not recommended. I watched a movie called Equinox from 1970, which is about a group of college kids that go out to a cabin in the woods where they find this ancient book in a weird language that summons up demons that start possessing them one by one. Yeah, there's some stop motion effects. There's a scene where steering wheel in a car moves by itself. The book was originally found by this older guy that was living there that recorded his findings on a tape recorder, and it was super low budget. And one of the guys even looked kind of like Sam Raimi, so of course it reminded me a lot of Evil Dead. It was nowhere near as good as Evil Dead. It was basically almost like a student film that ended up being picked up by a real distributor that kind of paid to finish off the movie. And the only reason to watch it is the people who worked on it include people like Dennis Muren and Jim Danforth and David Allen. If you don't know who those people are, then there's no reason to watch this movie. But they're big effects people. There's some cool stop motion stuff, a lot of Ray Harryhausen homage. It's almost like it felt like they were trying to do a Ray Harryhausen movie but turn it into a horror movie. It wasn't good, but given its historical significance, it was at least interesting. And some of the effects were cool. There's some cool perspective stuff where they have a guy that's supposed to look like a giant that's just closer to the camera. And it worked. It was pretty cool. And then the only other thing I watched was Season 2 of Castlevania, which I rewatched. Back when Season 3 came out, I rewatched Season 1 and said I gotta rewatch everything so I can watch Season 3. And now that Season 4 is out, I finally finished rewatching Season 2. So I'll get to Season 3 when Season 5 comes out. And yeah, apparently I'll always be 2 years behind. And that's everything I watched. The only thing I read that I finished was the first Marvel Epic collection of the Conan the Barbarian comics from the early 70s, which impressed me. I didn't expect to like them as much as I did. I had read some of them before in some Dark Horse books that were recolored in the ugliest way possible, where everything was just gray and brown. Seeing them in the original coloring is a lot better, and I was really surprised at how good some of the stories were. Most of them are not directly adapted from the original Robert E. Howard stories, and it didn't really feel like the same character to me, because I'm a huge fan of those original stories, but some of the issues were really cool too. So I guess I would probably recommend those. And those are all written by Roy Thomas and illustrated by Barry Windsor Smith. As far as video games, I played a lot of Star Wars Battlefront 2 with my brother. The good Star Wars Battlefront 2, not the shitty one.
Okay.
And I think I progressed one level in Medal of Honor Frontline on the PS2. I haven't had much time. I've had a lot of stuff I've been working on. So what about you? What did you watch this month?
It's kind of all over the place this month.
That's pretty normal.
Yeah. I watched Dodgeball, which I saw for the first time probably when it came out. And I remember being a dumb kid thinking it was the funniest thing ever, but it was not that funny.
Yeah, I remember when it came out and how much I wanted to see it. And I didn't end up seeing it until probably a few years later. And I was not impressed, but it seems to be one of those movies that everybody loves.
Or just quotes the hell out of.
Yeah, but it's not that funny.
I mean, I like Ben Stiller. It depends on the role he's playing. He played a very similar character in Heavyweights, and I really like his character in that. But in this one, even though he's pretty much the same thing, it just wasn't the same.
I know you like Vince Vaughn, though, so...
Only in Psycho 5. I watched Snatch from 2000, which is a crime comedy. The opening was so ridiculous with all this outrageous cinematography, just trying to be different, but like really cool at the same time.
Yeah.
I felt like I was reading freaking War and Peace. There were so many characters thrown at me in the first 5 minutes, and they'd labeled them all with names and everything. Ugh.
I do think that opening makes it feel like it thinks it's more important than it is. Like, these are characters that you should know, but it's not really that kind of movie.
Right, and it turns out that organically it moves forward on its own. Well, in the opening, I was like, I'm going to hate this movie. But by the end, I was like, I didn't really hate that movie. But I mean, you got a nice all-star cast in there. You got Benicio del Toro. You got Brad Pitts. Got Jason Statham. You know, pretty good cast in there.
Back when Jason Statham actually played characters of some kind, instead of just being in all these dumb action movies.
What was the one where he hooked up the clips to his tongue because he needed
Oh,
a
yeah.
charge?
Was that Crank? Is that what it was called?
Was that Crank 2? High Voltage? I watched Hellboy, which I've seen a couple times. Still good.
Yeah, I prefer the second one.
Too bad we lost John Hurt.
Mm-hmm. He was always the best Hellboy.
I watched Beavis and Butthead Do America, which I saw for the first time probably back in, I don't know, middle school. And it was goofy, and I watched it now. And there are some parts that are actually really funny. That movie feels like it's better than it has the right to be.
I don't think I've ever seen the whole thing. I've seen bits and pieces of it over the years.
I mean, the cast in that always surprises me. You know, you got Bruce Willis, you got Demi Moore, you got Cloris Leachman, you got Robert Stack.
You got Hank Hill.
Well, I know when they were originally going to make it, they were going to have, I think, SNL people voicing Beavis and Butthead, and not Mike Judge.
That would have been a mistake.
Yeah. Cloris Leachman always cracks me up, her character in that one. They're like, I want you to sound like a really, really old lady. And she's already, you know, really old, but she manages to go 200% old. Apparently David Letterman has a voice cameo in there too, but I don't know if that's true.
I can't stand David Letterman.
You just don't like comedy. Okay, on the opposite side, I watched I, Robot with Will Smith. What a piece of shit. Holy crap. I knew it was going to be dumb, but it was so dumb.
Yeah, I think I watched maybe 10 minutes of it somewhere in the middle, and I could tell the kind of movie it was, and I was just like, yeah, I'm done.
Right, I went in knowing that and willing to commit to watch all of it, and I did, and it was just so awful.
And it has nothing to do with the book, which is a great book.
I've read the book. The book is sweet. And Will Smith, it was when they were putting him in everything.
Yeah.
And it's so surface level. Everything is just so blatant. It's like he doesn't like robots. And there are so many scenes where he just walks out and sees a robot and just goes and just shakes his head. And he literally says, I don't like robots. I watched, it was on this like shitty movie kick. I watched Green Lantern, which was also way worse than I could have imagined.
I've never seen that.
I just felt physically ill right now from thinking about it. Yeah, everything about it was idiotic. So Sinestro's in it, and, even people who don't really know Green Lantern stuff kind of have the understanding that Sinestro's a bad guy. I mean, his name is Sinestro.
Yeah.
But, his appearance is visually striking, like you usually remember it.
Mm-hmm.
So he's in it, but he's like, in the Green Lantern Corps. And his whole push is telling the Guardians in charge, like, hey, we have to utilize the power of the Yellow Lantern because the Green Lantern's not strong enough, yada, yada, yada. But at the end, Ryan Reynolds uses the power of the Green Lantern to show that it's more powerful than the Yellow Lantern and goodness will prevail and whatever. It's fiction. And and they win, and he's right. But after the credits, Sinestro takes the yellow ring anyway and turns evil and says, now I'm going to take over and win. But he just saw that the yellow lost. And he even told Ryan Reynolds, I guess you were right and I was wrong. But then he still becomes evil Sinestro at the end, which didn't make any sense. Well, that was just one thing. It didn't make sense. Okay, moving on. I watched Hook. I like Hook. I know you probably don't like Hook.
I liked it a lot as a kid, but I haven't seen it since then. I've been kind of wanting to. I definitely like the music, some of the performances.
I think Dustin Hoffman is so good in that movie.
Yeah.
You watch some of his other stuff and you can't really imagine him doing that.
Mm-hmm.
He really went all in. I really liked it. And Robin Williams, I don't know how you feel about Robin Williams.
Indifferent. I don't like him the way some people really do, but I definitely don't have a problem with him or anything.
I like Robin Williams. He's not as good as Will Smith. One actor played the genie correctly. I actually never saw that remake, and I don't have any desire to.
Yeah.
Even though I watched I, Robot and Green Lantern. So obviously I watch shitty movies. I guess I'm just not in the mood to watch that one yet. So this thing popped up on Netflix. It was Fear Street, which is the R.L. Stine book series. There are 3 parts. And I was expecting it to kind of fall into the Goosebumps movie thing, which has Jack Black, right?
Yeah.
And it's like Goosebumps stuff comes alive and it's all goofy and comedic. I was kind of expecting that. It is not that at all. Not even close. There is gratuitous violence and sex and drug use. It's just...
Oh, that's weird.
But like still teenagers. It's really going out of its way to be this really big thing.
Was Fear Street the series that he did as like an adult horror series?
Well, there was Fear Street, and then there was Ghosts of Fear Street. I'm not sure what the difference is. But I know I read at least a couple Fear Street books, and they just kind of felt like Goosebumps book with a little more violence, maybe?
Because I know one of his rules on the Goosebumps books was that nobody dies, even though some people kind of die.
I died so many times in those Choose Your Own Adventure ones.
Yeah.
There was one where the only way to get to the good ending is to randomly turn to that page, because no page leads to that ending. Because what I used to do was I would go through and, follow the paths, and then eventually when I felt like I had done enough of them, I would just read it front to back.
I would always keep my fingers in all the previous branchings, and yeah.
Hell yeah, so you have all 5 fingers, holding pages just in case.
Yeah, I'd have to move on to my toes sometimes.
Stick my tongue in there. So it's 3 parts. And the first part is modern, the second one is in like the 80s, and the third part is way back in more colonial times or something like that. I was duly impressed by the third part at how much they really worked on the production design of it. And the story is, basic. It felt like an R.L. Stine setup. 2 sides of town. There's like Sunnyville or Sunnyvale and Shady Side. So obviously that's clear what's happening there. And there's a curse on the town with this witch, and they kind of investigate the whole history of that and how to stop the curse, which sounds like an R.L. Stine thing, right?
Yeah.
But in the first part, there was all of this just blatant sex going on, and I was like, okay. There's one part where this girl is possessed, so to free her, she has to die. So the two druggies of the gang set up enough drugs so she'll die, and then they'll be able to resuscitate her, which did not really feel like an R.L. Stine thing.
Yeah.
It was unexpected. I wouldn't say it was bad, but I wasn't sure who the audience was supposed to be. For teenagers or young teens, there were some things in there I was like, I don't know about that. But then as an adult watching it, I was like, this is too juvenile. So I don't really know.
Did they do all the fake scares, like the chapter break kind of scares where it turns out, oh, it's just my brother wearing a mask?
No, it usually ended with somebody getting their head chopped off or just stabbed 30 times. And R.L. Stine's name isn't really on it anywhere that I could see. So maybe they were trying to show people, hey, this is not a kid's thing. But then why call it Fear Street?
Yeah.
I watched Schitt's Creek. Just felt like checking it out. You would not like it, I'll tell you right now.
Yeah, that's the impression I already got.
I can see why people like it. It wasn't my favorite or anything. I watched With Bob and David, which was one of the earlier Netflix original shows with David Cross and Bob Odenkirk. It's definitely their style of humor.
Was that a show that was on a channel first and then got picked up by Netflix?
No, they did Mr. Show, and then these years later, Netflix was like, we want you to do another show. I don't know if 2015, if it was more in the pop culture, what was really, really funny, because there was a lot of it was just kind of like, yeah, I guess that's pretty humorous. Maybe it's just not my style of humor. I mean, humor is so subjective.
Yeah, it's either right or it's wrong.
I watched Masters of the Universe Revelation, which is that Netflix He-Man continuation. It's not a reboot. It's not a reimagining. It's more of a continuation of the 80s series. I watched a good chunk of the 80s series. I didn't really watch the 90s one. And then I watched a good chunk of the 2000s one.
I mean, I used to watch the 80s one as a kid. I have watched a few more episodes more recently because they show it on TV sometimes. But honestly, I wouldn't remember that much at this point. And of course, I've seen the Dolph Lundgren movie multiple times.
Right. But yeah, this one has more in-depth storytelling than I really would have imagined for Masters of the Universe. Kevin Smith is behind the whole thing, and I'll say right now, I am not a fan of Kevin Smith.
Yeah, I know you're jealous of his success. You tried to make your own movie called Clerks, but he got to it first.
I mean, just because I spelled mine with a K. Clerks.
I like how all of a sudden it's pronounced differently. I don't think I've ever seen a Kevin Smith movie. I don't really like him as a person. I feel like he's a good storyteller. I don't know. I don't like his sense of humor.
I don't either. This show was well written, though. There weren't that many episodes, but it was clear the way it ended that they're going to make more. So the whole show centers around Teela. He-Man and Skeletor both kind of go away at the end of the first episode. And when they disappear, they take all the magic of the whole universe with them or whatever. So the show is basically Teela trying to get that back, or else the whole universe will die or something. Animation was high quality. Didn't do that dumb thing where it's clear some is CGI and some is not.
Mm-hmm.
And the writing was pretty good. And Skeletor is voiced by Mark Hamill, who is just doing a straight-up Joker voice. They had this thing where the creators of the show are talking about the show, and they talk to some of the voice actors, and Kevin Smith is acting way too excited. It was unnerving. I don't think that's how he really is in real life, but it was like he was trying to channel all of the excitement to you as the viewer to be excited. But I was sitting on my couch eating Cheez-Its.
He always seems to try to get himself involved with a bunch of different pop culture franchises, but it doesn't seem like he's really a fit for most of them.
The only original voice talent they had on this one from the original show was Alan Oppenheimer, who was Skeletor, Man-at-Arms, and Merman from the original one.
So who does he play in this one?
Mossman. It was interesting how they made the 80s characters fit for this storyline without just shoving them in there. And they talk to him. They do that thing where they talk to them, but they don't really have a lot to talk about because they're from such different eras.
Mm-hmm.
And Kevin Smith can say, I'm such a huge fan. You voiced these characters in the original show. And then that voice actor will talk about these stories that aren't really relatable now and reference all these people that nobody really knows who they are anymore. And it just kind of falls flat. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it was a good show. And I would definitely watch more episodes.
Okay.
And I just needed movies to play in the background this month. So that was Austin Powers 1, 2, and 3.
I think I've only seen the first one.
And I think that one is definitely the strongest out of the three.
It definitely felt like the kind of thing where they would be recycling jokes in the other ones.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the first one is, I think, the only one really worth watching. I read The Essential Tomb of Dracula Volume 3, which at the beginning I was not sure about because they had him fighting the Silver Surfer. Like, come on. This cosmic being riding around on a surfboard, goes to different planets and shit. It's going to fight this guy who can turn into water vapor. Ooh.
I think you underestimate Dracula's power.
I mean, all he's got to do is shoot his star beam at him and blow him up, you know? Or whatever the surfer does, I don't know.
I mean, Dracula's supernatural.
He still has limits.
I think you have limits.
His limits seem much more restrictive than the Silver Surfer's limits.
I disagree, but okay.
Made me think of things like Marvel vs. Capcom, where you can be Jill Valentine and physically punch and kick Galactus to death. But the later stuff in that volume was focused around him and his son. But then there's this cult, and the leader of the cult is actually planning on taking the kid for himself to rule and kind of pushing Dracula off to the side, but then Dracula knows because he's Dracula. And then the kid gets possessed by an angelic presence. It was very confusing. But it was a lot better than fighting against the Silver Surfer. There was a lot of strong continuity. I was surprised.
It sounds like Dracula is the protagonist.
Yes.
That sounds kind of cool.
Yeah, it was cool. I read Essential Daredevil Volume 6, because that's the only one I have. In my mind, Spider-Man is the wisecracking superhero, but Daredevil, in this volume at least, was 100 times worse.
He was originally like that. It wasn't until like the Frank Miller ones where Daredevil kind of stopped being like that.
You know, all the villains even say, shut up. And then there was his female interest. So the way she shows up is she's just in his apartment because she knows the person who used to live there, and Matt didn't change his locks because he's an idiot. And he's like, what are you doing here? And she's like, hey, I knew the person who used to live here. And then he gets called away for Daredevil stuff, and he's like, you can stay here, but make sure you clean up. And then he leaves. This total stranger. And the villains were kind of goofy. The Jester takes over all of the airwaves for TV and has this machine that can show whatever he wants it to show. So he creates all these outlandish stories like JFK still being alive and people saying things they're not actually saying and, you know, confuses everybody. But it's only television. All other media says, we don't know what's going on with television, but it's incorrect. But everybody's like, but I saw it on TV. So they'll have a news reporter saying some crazy ass story. And then that news reporter will be at a physical in-person event and say, I never said those things. Something is happening. I wasn't even in the country when those things were being said. And people are like, I don't know, because I saw it on TV.
Super relevant for today's era, it sounds like.
And the only thing I've been playing really was What the Golf. Have you heard of that?
No.
It's billed as a golf game for people who hate golf. And I picked it up on a recommendation of somebody else. And they said, you're really going to like this game. Which I hate when people say that. Yeah, but What the Golf, there's this little tutorial that is very helpful and very much sets up what the game is. So the first one, you hit the ball and you hit the flagpole. And it goes, okay, hole number 2. And when you do your swing, instead of the ball going, like your whole guy, like just gets thrown towards the flagpole. And you go, oh, okay. And then in some other ones, you know, you have your arrow cursor of which way it's going to go and how hard it's going to hit. Mm-hmm. And then when you release, the arrow cursor itself is the thing that you're trying to get to the flagpole. You know, it's things like that. It gets a lot more mileage than I ever would have thought possible. And they even have DLC stuff, and I did all of that. It was really good, actually.
Sounds weird.
It is weird, but just doing that little tutorial sold me on it. So how do we finish the last one of this?
So that's another month down the drain.
So much wasted time. And you wasted who knows how much time listening to it. So if you want to waste more time, you can just subscribe, because we do this every month until we decide not to.
Yeah, hopefully that'll be soon.